Hi.
It's lovely. Thank you for joining us, Kunle.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to have some slides rolling behind us. This is a
Yeah.
we'll talk. You'll point out some things as they appear on the slides. And we'll have a conversation.
Yeah.
That suits?
That's good.
Um, and I thought actually maybe we might start. Thank you very much with. A little bit about Michael as well, and you work with Michael, is
Yeah.
that right? Can you explain a little bit about the relationship of your work and what we've just been seeing on stage?
Well, Michael and I have been working together for about 3 years, maybe a little more. And Michael came to us to help think about the project that he just described, and essentially how to create a physical structure, a physical built environment to accommodate some of these uh, opportunities, challenges, aspirations of the community, and create a space where they can have a voice to express these incredible talents that he's just shown us today, and also a platform to develop themselves to the rest of the world and with the rest of the world.
So in a way, do you think you've been helping realize a lot of the, I mean, he's been doing a lot of the research and the development and unearthing the opportunity, and your role has been to help actually
Materialize this.
materialize this, is that right?
Yeah, in one way, yes. I mean, Michael is sort of the interface between the community and us as the designers. And I think, well, not just an interface, but he's really managing a number of processes of the community engagements, and we're also working with them, with the community, to understand what their needs are, to understand the kinds of spaces. So he's not quite a client. The community, I would say, is ultimately the client. But Michael has been managing the processes and helping to develop the project.
We might talk about this a little later, particularly in the context of how one actually engages and works with a community.
Right.
But could right now in London, I know it's a great honour to be asked to design a pavilion for the Serpentine Gallery. Not many architects in the world are given that honour. You've just been invited. The work is up right now. Could you tell us a little bit about it? I think maybe those images are going to appear, but tell us a little bit about what it is, and also, hey, look at that.
Just as if right on point, yeah. Well, so the Serpentine program is this annual project that invites architects from all over the world, and it only invites architects who have never built works in London, and you're asked to build a pavilion. The brief is usually the same, and the main pavilion has been about a main building of about 300 square meters. And this year was extended to have 4 summer houses, which is a response to an old building, 17th century structure called Queen Caroline's Temple. And what we did was to learn from that building and sort of reinterpret it into a contemporary form that is more open and really allows the users to engage and interact with the building in sort of a totally different perspective.
And how does this relate in any way to the other work that you're doing? Because it feels like it's in a very different space. I mean, physically, obviously, but I mean, intellectually.
Yeah, I'm really glad it feels that way, because we're not trying to repeat ourselves. I think, but there are similarities. There are, in terms of the ideology and in terms of the way we think, whether it's Makoko or it's Venice or it's our project in Chicago or in Chikoko. One of the important things that we do is to learn from the environment, So we actually just look at the environment, we learn, whether it's the architecture, whether it's the people, whether it's the culture, and we try to, take from that and move it forward. And it's an incremental development, and hopefully iterative that moves towards improvement. So on the Serpentine, I mean, in Makoko, of course, it's about a community that lives on water, and we learn from them, and we work together to produce a new form. In Serpentine, it's about an old 17th century historic architecture that we learned, understood the proportions, and we sort of flipped it around to create something completely new.
Can I ask you a little bit about your process, actually, around Makoko, and particularly around this, because it's a fascinating, and we've heard Tracy talking this morning, set a context for designing around water.
Fantastic presentation, by the way, Tracy. It's great.
And you're manifesting these, and how does that work? Do you prototype? Do you develop maquettes, or how does the actual process? Because you're breaking new ground. It's very innovative work that you're doing.
I think we're not afraid of challenges, and that's what we sort of where we start our work, where we find the greatest challenges. And I think it's important to understand that, while working in that process, it's not about perfection. It's really about improvements. It's about taking that step gradually. And particularly, so for us, it's that you first of all understand the context that we're dealing with, both demographically, economically, socially, environmentally, resource-wise. And the task is, how do you bring all these issues together? How do you create it politically also, and generate something that maybe activates or catalyzes change? And the change may not be immediately an architectural or physical impact. It may be a social construct that you're disrupting, or a political system. And so it's a play of a lot of things that we ultimately, and a long process. And sometimes in the process, it may seem a little awkward, and like in Michael's project, there are these moments of real angst and real sort of fear and disruptions. But I think if you have a long-term vision and you understand where you're going, we are constantly moving in that direction. So that's kind of our process, is that we understand the long-term plan, and we're making short-term, we execute really focused on production.
I mean, there are sort of three different sort of areas that you just described of innovation. One around the people and the citizens and engaging with them.
Right.
One around the actual engineering.
Right.
Yes. But there's also a legislative area as well. Yeah. And these are not easy contexts, as we've just been hearing. Yeah. Sometimes the local government might be in denial.
Right.
How do you actually operate in that environment?
I mean, I think, it's for us, it really starts from, let's say, the need, right? Like a context where people want something, or people, there's an opportunity, or there's a challenge. Yeah. And in the case of Makoko, for instance, and what we're saying, it's a context where, people have lived on the waterfront for many years, and they are looking to develop and become a more established a community. But one of the challenges, like you mentioned, is that there's no legitimacy. The community has no status. And it has no status for many reasons, one being that actually in a state like Lagos, there is no law that allows one to occupy water the way they do. Yeah. And to change the notion of that within the legislative construct, we decided to develop something that catalyzes that, the idea of building on water in a way that is very different, in a way that...
How did that project actually start? Because, I mean, it's a really bold move. I mean, what was the inception? What was the beginning of the project, the seed?
I was actually researching affordable housing, and I really just was looking towards in Lagos. I had just started my company, Kunle in 2010, and I was trying to find, how to contribute to environments and Lagos specifically. And I was told by one of the government officials that actually housing is one of the main challenges. And I said, well, I'm going to try to find what the minimum dwelling in Lagos State is. What is, so I sort of looked around and I saw this community, of course, that everyone had been seeing on water across the bridge. And I said, well, if these people can build so much out of so little, perhaps there's a key, there's an insight to how we can develop using local resources. And I went there and I said, well, if I could learn from you and if I could improve on this and help you take this forward, maybe I would be able to be a part of making a change.
And how did you even start that conversation?
I found an opportunity. Someone took me right there and I visited the community, and I was really shocked by just the amount of urbanism I had seen there and the amount of life and the kind of things that we're doing. At the same time, also very inspired, by just the opportunities, because I've also had the privilege of living in different parts of the world, in Amsterdam, whether it's Venice, and seeing that there could be a better life there. And for me, that was critical. How can I help move them out? So then, while we're thinking about that, there was a major rainstorm in 2011, and it occurred to me that the problem is also not just social, physical, but also environmental, and that places are getting flooded, and so the idea was to merge the issues of urbanization with climate change, and that was the point where we launched the African Water Cities Project, which is really looking at the points of intersection of rapid urbanization in African cities and climate change. And that if we could develop solutions at those points of intersections, solutions that are, let's say, based on local resources, based on intelligence, this might be a key. So whether it's Makoko or Chikoko, it's really about catalyzing change and creating a way of thinking differently, building differently, and living differently around water.
And how did the conversation develop? Because, the school was built,
right.
But there were problems, as I understand it, all the way with the authorities.
Well, there were only problems after it was built.
Is that just because you went and did it?
Yes, because and I think that's we kept informing the government that these were our ideas, and sending letters, and I've written hundreds of letters to tons of letters at least to the states, letting them know this is what we want to do, that we're getting partnerships, we're getting sponsors, we're dealing with the community, but they were it wasn't a priority at the time, and we realized that there was a gap in the system in a way that allows us to actually intervene with a structure like that, because you actually don't quite need, it's not quite a house, it's not a building, and it's not quite a boat. So, there's no real legislation for building a houseboat. You don't need a permit to dock your boat there. So the first prototype was just this intervention that they woke up in the morning and like, oh shit, what's going on here? And we said, well, it's just there. Just go look at it. It's just a test thing. It's a prototype, and they sent nearly 50 officials there between 2013, 2015, taking notes like engineers and assessing it, and they came back with a positive result that okay, this is really a good prototype. And it was in 2015 the government actually released a press briefing which included the school as a prototype that could be used for the urban regeneration. So they accepted that they would now regenerate the community as a water-based community. The details of how that will be implemented is yet to be firmed up. So the structure was really meant for that. That was really the key thing. It functioned as a community space and also a school, because we had, as an extension to an existing school. So a couple of students used it as classrooms. So it's always been conceived around this sort of temporariness of just in an intervention. And of course, I'm sure a lot of people are aware that it collapsed a few weeks ago. But I think just without going in too much detail, the fact is that it was intended to be brought down, and it was actually part of a plan to replace it with the one that we've just launched in Venice as an improved prototype. And the circumstances
which also won the Silver Lion, yeah?
Yes, we're really grateful for that moment. Just by chance, it just happens after leaving it for 2 months without attendance. I mean, it was handed over to the community. There are lots of background issues that we are learning from them, but most important point is that we are learning. We are learning as architects. We're moving, doing the next thing. The community is learning to manage, to maintain, to create a structure that is much more sustainable. The government is responding, and
they are.
Yes, we are having conversations, and the most important thing is that even this circumstance allows the project to move to the next phase, and and we're all very happy so far.
Can I take you? I mean, thank you. I mean, that's a fantastic case study in its own right, but I'd almost like to sort of go right back to where it started, because am I right? Your father was a modernist architect, is that right?
Yeah, yes.
So, was this an introduction into modernism from him? Were you tutored at his knee, or how did that?
Yeah, I guess I just grew up in the environment, and a very interesting environment also, where architecture was both sort of a domestic thing, and he never said, "Oh, you should be an architect." I just grew up around him, constantly reinventing the house and like reshaping our building. I lived in northern part. I was born in northern part of Nigeria, which is sort of a suburban part. And my grandfather was actually a farmer, so my home was really both sort of a farm and architecture inserted into this farm. We had animals and cattle, and so the environment had become a conscious part of my upbringing, and also architecture as a built thing, where my father constantly experimented, and he would change, he would add to it. And I remember when I would go travel, I went to boarding school back then and come back, and there was always this anxiety that, oh my God, what would my house look like, So transformation, change has always been part of sort of the learning process, and I would say that's one important thing I've taken away from my late father.
Can I talk about, and I'm assuming he's a significant influence, because Dutch architecture must be an important part of one of the influences, and particularly you worked with at OMA and with Rem Koolhaas. What did you learn there? How important was that for your work?
Well, it's a very good question, and a very, very profound one. I learned an immense lot from OMA, and everything anyone who's been there learned, and hope, just whether it's really just the discipline of working. I remember the first time I went to OMA, which was 2002. This is a young African boy coming, into Amsterdam, or the Rotterdam back then, going to the office, and the manager showed me. He took me into the main space where all the, the studio, and there were people like on models and like making stuff, and he's like, "Welcome to OMA, the Navy SEAL of architecture." I'm like, wow. And that was really my experience. It was really like a Navy SEAL of architecture, really training, rigorous, and I enjoyed every part of it. I loved it. And I had the opportunity to work very closely with Rem, with whom have a really great relationship, and just his relentlessness, just learning that you can always improve and you can always take the next step. Just when you think you've done your best, it can always be better.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is just a small fraction of what I learned from him.
And how have you taken, can you tell us a little bit about your practice today? And what's the mix of disciplines and how does it actually work?
Yeah, we're a very small practice. We may have a bit of a large footprint, but we're a very small team and really great team. I work with amazing group of really, some of them are here, Björn, and they've been with me for quite a while.
Yeah.
And we're focused on four, let's say, fields of operation: architecture, urbanism, arts and culture, and research and academia, let's say. So it's really about architecture, urban design, research, and culture, arts and culture. And projects, everyone sort of works around everything, and I think whether it's a building or a product, everything spans across these four fields of operation. And how they sort of, whether you're building an object, they can cross fields. So the Serpentine, for instance, is architecture, a summer house, but it's also furniture, which is like a product design. And it's also art. It's sort of in the Serpentine galleries. So it's about this cross-pollination of, let's say, cultures and thoughts.
And are you, in a way, seeking out or defining the geographies of your work? Because you're working all around the world, but you've obviously maintained some very particular areas of interest as well. So how are you balancing that? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people knocking on your door now.
Not enough, so please knock some more. When I started about 6 years ago, 5.5 years ago, I had the opportunity to work in different parts of the world through OMA, and the main starting point was to focus on bringing the knowledge and also learning from Africa, the context, the continent, really bringing back, but also learning from. So my focus was Africa as a starting point. But I think very quickly we actually have now had the opportunity to begin to learn from, take some of these learning points and re-propagate them again to the rest of the world. So we're working, we've done a project in Chicago, which we're yet to build. We're looking, we've just done something in London and Venice. So we're widening our footprints, but the focus has been, let's say, Africa and the global south.
You've described today some of the ways in which your buildings interrelate with local communities and also with water in particular. But what about technology? Because our ability to put up buildings is getting better and better, but not always our ability to keep up with infrastructure, actually bring technology together with buildings. We hear a lot about smart cities, but do they really work for people? So is that also part of your agenda?
It's in a very different way from perhaps the way a lot of technology is described today. I'm keenly aware of one of the most important challenges of our time, which is urbanization, and really the impact of urbanization, the challenges and the opportunities. The fact that a lot of people are coming together, moving into cities, and there's a convergence of just humanity in various areas. So it means that there are more, let's say, the networks are getting much more together in certain areas. And the two most urbanizing continents are Asia and Africa. And for me, technology is really, first of all, about what people do, you know? So I'm very interested in what happens when loads of people come together. What are the basic things they do? What technologies are available for them? I'm not trying to force myself to invent something new. I'm very interested in learning from what people do normally. And if we can propagate the good technologies, whether it is local, whether it is very basic, whether it's just the way they understand the orientation of the sun, like we have forgotten in architecture. I'm very interested in recultivating that, and then find these relevant, high-tech technology, whether it's the solar panels or or the latest invention in mobile devices that would really just inject the old into the new to create something completely different.
Now, unfortunately, because I think I'm so fascinated, I think I could sit here asking questions and hearing your wonderful answers, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. So, Kunle, thank you very, very much. Kunle Adeyemi.